LD Comics is a women-led, welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LD Comics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachel Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
My name is Sarah Akinterinwa. This is like a little cartoon I always use of myself whenever I'm doing a presentation, because I took a long time on it, so I just want to share it with everyone. And I am a cartoonist and illustrator, and also the author of my book that came out in February, Why You'll Never Find the One, which is a dating self-help book. And yeah, I go back and forth between calling myself a cartoonist and illustrator and author. So I'm kind of just a mix of both. And yeah, this is what I do as my full-time career. Oh, sorry. So before I became a cartoonist, I was working as a school therapist, and this was something that I was actually very bored doing. So I left university and I moved to France for a few years, where I was just an English teacher, kind of having fun and figuring out what I want to do as a career, and kind of just, doing something completely unrelated to my degree, which is in humanistic counseling, which is basically like therapy. And when I left France, I moved back to the UK and decided to go straight into being a therapist, and realized it wasn't a creative enough career for me. And this is a little cartoon I did a few months ago about the expectations I had of myself as a therapist and the reality, which is basically that I knew I would struggle a little bit with, empathy and trying not to over empathize with people. And I just kind of realized it's not really the career path for me. And I only knew at the time that I wanted to do something creative. So I left my job as a therapist and moved back home to Kent. So I was working in Nottingham and I moved back to Kent. This was in, I think, January of 2020, when the pandemic was just it was so new, and no one was really, everyone just thought it was a little cold. But within months, obviously, it changed the world, and we were having to quarantine, and I didn't have a job. I was living in the living room, sleeping on the sofa, and I had I basically was frozen. I felt stuck, and I didn't know where to go, what to do. And I did have a part-time job, but I was made redundant, so I was pretty much unemployed. I was making so little money, I wouldn't even consider myself employed, but I was made redundant from that. And it was a really tough time for me. And before this, at this time, all I knew was I wanted to do something creative, and now I felt like I couldn't do anything. So in that time, I didn't look as good as this. I looked a mess, to be honest. I was always in my pajamas and my hair was never done. So this is just, this is not a representation of me in 2020 at all. I think I spent majority of 2020 in big t-shirts and my pajamas. But this was a time, because we were in quarantine, I kind of needed a creative outlet. So I was drawing cartoons every single day and posting them on Instagram. I didn't know I was a cartoonist, and I had never drawn cartoons before. I like drawing portraits and working with charcoal and biro pen and pencils. But then I needed something simple and fun and easy to do, that I could do every single day. And so I got out my Wacom tablet that I bought a year before, and I started using it. And I would draw every day and post on my Instagram. I wasn't trying to be a cartoonist or be anything really. I was just doing it because I was really bored and miserable, and I just needed something to do. But I was very surprised when, at the time I started a comic called Oyin and Kojo. And this was the cartoon I would post every day on Instagram. And it's about a Black British couple, and just kind of like funny, mundane, single panel moments in their like fictional life. And I drew it because it was funny, it was fun, it allowed me to kind of talk about the Black British experience, about dating, about couples, about being in quarantine. And I would just kind of project all my thoughts and ideas into this funny comic. And people really liked it, and I gained a lot of followers. And I thought, well, this is a nice way to kill time during quarantine. And within a couple of months, the editor for the New Yorker magazine, the cartoon editor, Emma Allen, reached out to me and offered me an opportunity to contribute as a cartoonist to the New Yorker, which I thought this was like someone was trying to catfish me or like with some kind of prank, but it was the real cartoon editor. And yeah, that was really exciting. And that was the moment I think my career goals changed. And I thought, well, I can actually make money from this little hobby that I came up with during quarantine. And so this is my first cartoon for the New Yorker, which I don't know if you can read the caption, but it says, this is going to be another one of those series where the only two minority characters who have nothing in common fall in love. Which, yeah, was just, again, this is the fun thing about being a New Yorker cartoonist. You kind of get to talk about, you know, politics, but in a funny and playful way. And I think that's the amazing thing about being a cartoonist in general, is that you can talk about the realities of life in the world and kind of compress really big conversations into one drawing with a caption or a speech bubble conversation. And yeah, this was posted on the New Yorker cartoon Instagram page, and it received a lot of criticism and a lot of hate, and it almost deterred me from continuing, but also kind of inspired me to keep talking about what I want to talk about and using my cartoons and my creativity to talk about real issues and have fun, because I think, you know, being a cartoonist, you kind of have to be open to criticism because you are kind of a critic as well. So yeah. And from then on, I got a lot of incredible opportunities that I'm so grateful for. So I had an exhibition last year. I was in the Cartoon Museum. I work with The Guardian now, every now and then. I've been published in different publications. It's been a roller coaster. It's been so much fun, and I feel very grateful, very honored for everything that I've been able to achieve since working with the New Yorker. So my cartoons, over time, I've kind of figured out what I really like to talk about and what I like to use my cartoons for. And I love talking about dating and relationships and the Black woman's experience in the UK in particular, when it comes to love and friendship and being a young adult. And I noticed that a lot of my work leans towards that, which you can see in Oyin and Kojo, the comic, and just in my random single panels that I usually post on my personal Instagram. And yeah, if you scroll through it, you can see a lot of comics quite similar to this. And I'm not really afraid to talk about the hard stuff. I'm not afraid to talk about sexuality and sexism and misogyny and the highs and the lows of love and friendship and all of those things that we all experience. And it's really important to me that my work feels honest and relatable and inclusive. And I'm not afraid to draw all the different body types and all the different skin tones and the hair. I really want my work for as many people as possible to see themselves in my work, even though that may not always be possible. You know, I want to see work that I don't usually get to see as a Black woman, especially as a Black cartoonist. There aren't very many of us. So as a result of this and the kind of themes I like to focus on, I have my book, which focuses on the Black woman's dating experience, and it's kind of a self-help book. The book isn't primarily for Black women, but it's for anyone who just wants to learn about dating and how to date and dating realistically. I think what's special about my book, Why You'll Never Find the One, and this is a page in my book, is the fact that the main character, the fictional main character, so it's a self-help book, but it's got like a comic running through it, is a Black woman. And I don't think there's many of its kind, and I don't think there are many graphic self-help books. And that's something I wanted to create because it doesn't exist, and I would love a self-help book with a comic in it. And yeah, again, it shows a Black woman being quite vulnerable and exploring, you know, her own identity and her own self-love and self-hate and self-apathy, and how that's affecting her love life. And at the same time, the book also explores the realities of dating in the modern day, you know, splitting the bill and feminism and toxic men and all the kind of the politics of dating. And I really, you know, it was so fun to write this book and do the artwork and everything, because I get to talk about my favorite things. And yeah, it's just basically a consolidation of all my interests and the things that are really important to women, especially women of color in our current day and age. So yeah, this is the front cover of my book, and that's me looking very happy on the day my book came out. It was a really tough journey. Doing a graphic novel, if anyone has made a graphic novel before, you know how hard it is to write a book and draw at the same time. It's not easy. And it took me 2 years of balancing working full-time and drawing and writing, and also dating myself and rehashing like really tough times in my own love life. Like, it was a tough journey, but I'm very proud of having achieved that. And I'm always very proud when I look at my book, like the physical book, and think, wow, I really did that. Like, I'm really proud of myself. I'm not sure why the last slide. So this is a slide of a comic that I did for The Guardian 2 years ago, and it just shows, I think it's one of my favorite drawings of myself, because it really is a representation of me every day. When I'm doing my art, I literally am sat there with a blanket and my glasses because I can't see the screen very well, and all my artwork surrounding me. And this is just me every day. I think it's my most honest piece of art. And yeah, my goals for the future as a Black woman cartoonist is to connect more with other cartoonists that are women and women of color, and to do my part, well, however that looks, to make cartooning more accessible and show people that it's a viable career, it's a sustainable career, and it's important. You know, we use cartoons to talk about real life issues. We use it to laugh. We use it to make people think. We use it to talk about politics. And I think we need more women cartoonists. We need more people of color cartoonists. We need more cartoonists from marginalized communities, because cartoons are important. And yeah, one of my goals is to create a community where there are more people like me, and to inspire more young people to consider being cartoonists. And I also hope to one day have an animated show of Oyin and Kojo. That would be really fun. And yeah, those are my goals for my future as a cartoonist. But at the moment, I can honestly say that I'm very proud of myself for and really grateful as well for all the people who've made it possible for me to be a cartoonist. There are so few of us doing this full time, and I consider myself very, very lucky and very grateful.
So my name is Lina Ghaibeh. I am a comics and animation artist, but I'm also an associate professor at the American University of Beirut and founding director of a center for Arab comic studies at the university. I'll talk my interests a little later. I thought it might be a good idea to present just a little bit about comics from the region, a bit of a backdrop, and then I'll go into my own personal work. Comics has a really rich heritage from the region, about over 100 years, starting the late 1800s, and then the golden ages of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But in the previous, but they were addressed to children. So the majority of work of comics was only for children. And it wasn't until the 1980s, very few independent experiences happened in comics addressing adults, but not until the rise of the, after the Arab uprisings, as they're called in the West, but we call them revolutions, because we are trying to free ourselves from the oppressive regimes, that comics showed up as a rise in comics for adults. Young people who took to the streets wanted to express their emotions, the things they're going through, show the streets of the Arab world and what was happening, talk about their experiences, and also talking about the to their freedom of expression and freedom from their call for freedom from these oppressive regimes. Just the very important thing here that I'll just refer to, I won't stay long in the history, is that these Arab artists had no platforms for publishing. We do not have publishing houses for comics. We don't have even publishers in other areas who want to publish comics. So it's pretty much a solo game almost. But the brilliant thing that happened, so we're talking 2011 onward, some a little before, was that the artists got together who were dying to draw and to publish their work, and they made collectives. And these collectives then did workshops in other countries, and the idea of the collective spread. So starting with the one on the far right, which is from Lebanon, which is called Samandal, and then later on moving to Tok Tok, Skef in Morocco, Tok Tok in Egypt, Lab 619 in Tunisia, etc. So these collectives started up this movement in comics and made it more possible and more interest slowly from publishing houses. Women were really a big part of the revolution, if not leaders, but also they were starting to express themselves through these comics. We don't have the history or anything got to do with superheroes, but I thought I'll just show you the one or two superheroes that showed up during the uprisings. But the one on the left is Nefertiti with a gas mask and says the voice of the woman is the revolution. The women started to write comics, and they took up issues spoke about the uprisings brought up these societal problems and issues, and some of which were, of course, harassment, domestic abuse, sexual violence. And so there was a feminist issue that came out that featured a lot of these different topics. And very recently, even the history of feminism in Lebanon, as seen from a non-Eurocentric perspective, was published with a variety of comics artists and in collaboration with a researcher and writer. So it's come a long way, of course. But I also wanted to point out that there are a lot of graphic novels by women or authors and artists. And the majority of this work deals with a variety of topics. Here it's Hashuma by Zainab from Morocco, speaks about body and sexuality in Morocco. Zine by a collective called Ziz in Lebanon, who talk about the streets. But a large number of the graphic narratives or novels are personal narratives, especially talking about the past during the war. Here we have two from Lebanon about their childhood during the civil war. The one on the left is Zena Abi Rashid, and on the right is Lana Merhej. And other comics that speak more contemporary or pressing issues, such as losing public spaces due to commercial, let's say, beaches that are being built and neglect of the government, but also other incarceration during uprisings and so on. So here, as the last two pieces I'm just showing you, is about a superhero that was a webcomic who was the superhero is a veiled woman who saves people. So this is now fiction. fictional, and so it's not all nonfiction. A lot of it is fiction too. And in this one, Egyptian artist Dina Muhammad has this hero who saves people from harassment, and women who are in the streets from harassment. She has recently published Shabek Lobek, which is a graphic novel, and it is in Arabic. It's in its 16th edition in Egypt. It means that means that with a population of 50 million, it's really being read and sold, and now is published by Pantheon in English, Shabek Lobek, and in England has also been published as Your Wish Is My Command. So just saying that overview is to say why I was part of, so I wrote a proposal to start a center on the study of Arab comics, because I found, not just myself, of course, many others have found that there's a great need to collect the comics, but to study it, to teach it, to promote it. And so we started in about 8 years ago, and it was an initiative for 8 years, and now we are a full-fledged academic center at the university, and it's called the Rada Mutaz Sawaf Center for Arab Comic Studies at AUB. The center runs an annual award for professionals in illustration, comics, and cartooning, and it's in its 8th year. We have a huge collection where we archive comics from the Arab world, and also, past and present, historical and new, as documentation for people to later on research, because you cannot create a research if you don't have a history that's documented. We also produce our own publications, including graphic novels, comics, and also writings on, such as the new generation Arab comics today. All that is to say that this thriving mood is something that is relatively new. We have an annual comics conference, such as Framing War and Conflict in Comics, Displacement and Seeking Refuge as Seen Through Comics, Drawing Invisible Lines, and exhibitions. The one on the far left over here is The New Generation, which was shown in the prestigious, the lovely, amazing Angoulême Festival, International Festival of Comics at the Museum of Comics in France. And we are showing at the Lakes Festival, which the LDC are also part of. That will be in the UK end of September. So that hopefully will give you a bit of a very, very fast overview of comics in the region, and also to understand where, I position myself in this. I am much older than these young people who are doing this comics, and I live in Beirut, where I draw a lot of my inspiration drawing the city. But I have a bicultural background. I'm half Danish, half Syrian, and I'm an identical twin. So this to me is a big part that has shaped me and shaped my work. I've lived in many Arab countries, in Egypt, in Yemen, in Syria, and Kuwait, and in Beirut, and of course, London, Texas, Copenhagen, but that's extra. And the reason I'm saying that is that being bicultural has shaped my outlook. It helped me see the world through two different lenses. And it also told me that different cultures are very different and can be similar in many things, but also are very complex things. And being an Arab is not one thing, but many things as well. Throughout my career, I have had the really, really fortunate opportunity. So I worked in animation at a TV station, where we were the first animation department in the entire Arab world to do animation for that aired on the news for adults, as a weekly series and then as a daily series. This is in the 1990s, so this is a while ago. It was quite ahead of its time. But on the side, I did comics also, and we had ultimate freedom in doing what we did. So I chose all my topics. And doing this presentation, I find a thread running through. It was not something I did in, very aware of but I'm an interest in social justice, women's human rights, but also belonging, identity, and personal narratives. So in the mid to late 90s, I was part of the very first collective of Arab comics artists who got together, and we did many exhibitions to promote comics first as a platform of expression for adults, and then also to write comics in Arabic, because we thought it was very important that it had to be in local languages and language from the region, and lastly to also teach it, do workshops in it, and also to use the Arabic script as part of the visual identity. This work is done like in 1988, at the end, towards the end of the Civil War, but all of us did the album was called From Beirut, and it was a love letter to our city, Beirut, even though it was during war. We wrote about the stories of the people who went to the jazz clubs at night and had probably a smoke, and also I had some fictional stories. This one was about a little fortune teller who sees the fortune or the future of what will happen to the city. And I was leaving then. I left to study for my master's. I left Beirut, and I find it quite autobiographic because the little fortune teller at the very end, she says, give me one moment before I leave. Just let me say my last goodbye, and then take me quickly before I won't change my mind. I left for a few years, but I couldn't. I had to come back, and I came back to Lebanon and stayed for 30 years. That's a really the reason I talked about this work is that so this independent like experience in comics for adults happened very as an isolated experience and did not spread across the Arab world. And then myself and my partner who became my husband, we were both comics artists. We moved into animation and did about 15 years of animation. And recently I decided I wanted to get back to this medium. I loved the immediacy of it. Animation takes a very long time. It's, you can't just sit down in an hour, or you have to have like a full day to do hundreds of drawings, and it takes a large production. So I have come back to the love of my life, which is comics. And during the Syrian revolution, I found that I couldn't do anything as a human being, as an artist. I felt very unable to help the people who are suffering, or to change the destiny, or to make things easier or better. But as an artist, I thought at least I could tell my side of the story. And this is why I wrote something called An Education in Fear. Don't be frightened by this. It doesn't look like that. It is published on the platform called The Nib, which is a comics journalism platform, and it's seen as a panel by panel, and you swipe through it. But I wanted to talk about, I lived in Syria during my middle school and high school years, and during that time, and it partially continues to today, the schooling was militarized, if you want. Public schools, you wore a uniform that slowly, gradually, like moved from, let's say, scouts look to a full military uniform. It was very harsh as an education. We had military training, and we wore the full outfits, as I said, but also we were judged or punished, physical punishment, where you had to like cross the yard on your knees or on your stomach. And also what I had wanted to say, and I'm going to go a little bit backwards, is that people were surprised that on the news, it looked like the population was in full support of the regime, and they wondered why there are millions of people in the streets who were supporting it. And this is what triggered this comic, because I was part of these public schools, and even at that time, we were taken at 12 years old, 13, 14, I mean, at quite a young age, we were put into buses and taken to streets, given, different things or banners to hold up, that said something we didn't even know what it was about. We were so gullible. So we weren't aware of what we were, supporting. So we were, forced to hold banners that supported the regime. So I felt the world needed to have that perspective. Also, the whole idea of education as a form of fear rather than. So when I studied in other countries, the professors or teachers in the schools would ask you a question and then ask your opinion. We never had that option. There was no, you learned everything by heart and then you recited it over again. You had no opinion. So that's that. More recently also, I had a neighbor, I have a neighbor who is a really nice, has become a friend. He's the caretaker of a building next door. And I wanted to tell his story. He's a refugee living in exile in Lebanon and supporting his family who live in one of the villages in Syria, which are in the far north side that is near the Kurdish, Kurdistan and other places, which means it is hit daily by not only Russian airplanes, but American airplanes and Lebanese, whatever, extreme and other extremists. And so they're caught in between. I wanted also to tell the story. It's a much longer form story. This is just one page as a portrait of somebody and how they're living this forced displacement. His brothers walked all the way to like Germany and so on. It's quite a long story. But this page here that I wanted to share with you is how he lives his children growing up on the phone. So he's been here since early part of the revolution or the war. So for 10 years, he has seen his children grow up through WhatsApp. He is illiterate, so he can't read or write, and therefore he uses WhatsApp as a form of communication. He can record, his voice greetings to his family, and they can speak to him and record it for him. So he has not only seen his children and his elderly parents grow older from a distance, but also he has heard when the bombings were happening, and he was immobile, unable to help them as it was happening, when they were being bombarded. So I just found that that experience of living from a distance and unable to, you have to support your family on the one hand, and you've left the country to do that, but on the other hand, you're unable to be there with them in their hardship, is a harrowing experience and very lonely at the same time. I have the same thing. Almost all my comics I haven't translated into English and Arabic so that they're accessible. More recently in 2020, on August 4th of 2020, a devastating explosion happened on the port of Beirut. If maybe some of you have heard of it. It's the third largest non-nuclear explosion in the world. It killed over like 230 people, but also left 300,000 homeless and demolished a huge portion of the city. Now, this is happening during a time we consider where there's no war, and the Lebanese are considered extremely, they love life, they live, party into middle of the night, but they're such a resilient nation. And this is one of those moments that everyone living here is like, we are not resilient, we're dying. We don't want to be going through this over and over and over again and start our life from scratch. Rubble, and I still found glass in my bag of rice a year after this explosion. We keep finding shards of glass all over that have still remained, no matter how much we have cleaned. And my house is about 4 kilometers away. So I felt that the need to express, it was very, very harrowing also mentally for all of us, devastating. It took a year. I'm not going to say to get over it, we didn't, but it took a really long time to process this thing. So my dear friend and also colleague who's a designer, her design firm is right next to the port. Her name is Joanne, and she lived she was at her office when it happened, and she wrote a very powerful testimony on social media when it happened. And I decided to take a few of the testimonies, and of course I asked her permission, and I made it into a short comic that speaks about the moment that this happens. I save my file on Illustrator and export it when I'm ready to leave the office to rest. She talks to her husband who's with her at the farm, and they want to go home. But as she's in the bathroom washing her hands, she hears the ground shakes, and they're afraid it's an earthquake. So she runs, because there were two explosions, a minor one that shook the buildings and then a huge one. And thank God for that first one, because it helped people hide and then reduce a little bit of the damage for the very few fortunate who did survive it. So she storms to the other room. The face of her friend tells her that she heard something too. And then they think that there are airplanes that are bombing Lebanon, because it was so powerful, and everybody heard airplanes, and everybody still the government still denies there were airplanes. But anyway, let's forget about that. The ground collapses. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but so we experience what they have, how they get out of the building, who they encounter as they leave. And more importantly to me is how it ends, which is something that I thought is very important to address in Lebanon and many parts of the region, is that as she goes through this harrowing scene and is leaving with people who are bloodied and the devastation, she says it's a scene that you want to unsee. Death so close to me, death, so much of it. Leave, leave, leave. Another mantra started, and it hasn't stopped since then. So the idea of these young people who are the brilliant minds and the creative people in Lebanon, and they're leaving. So we have an exodus of I think the largest number of people left after this explosion. 40% of the university faculty left. More than 40 or 45 or so left of the medical team at the hospital. So we have lost a huge number of people leaving due to these, events or that happen in our region. Okay, happiness. My identical twin is May. Now I have white hair and she still dyes her hair red, but I thought we experience our twinhood in ways that people are very curious about, but also we find ourselves surprised by some of the things that we go through and aren't really aware that nobody else goes through that unless you're a twin. So this story is called Intertwined, and it's about how we compare our bodies when we're ill, just to make sure that so we gauge each other's bodies. So I have an identical twin. When going through changes, we tend to compare our bodies almost as a reflection of each other. If I find a bump on my knee, I ask to see hers, and if we both have it, then I assume it's normal. Anyway, the stories, I tell a story about how we both experience a similar rash, and I call her, and then she says she has the same thing. So we both go to the doctor at the same time, and we ask the doctor if we can both come in and have the same, help him assess us. And we were diagnosed with some kind of a rash caused by stress. And we realized that my father had had a stroke, and that both of us had, for the last few months, had been through a very, very emotional, stressful period. My father was paralyzed, and so our bodies reacted in a similar way. But I spoke about being identical and how we compare each other, not only in physically, but because while our bodies are intertwined, our minds perhaps are too. Because one time when I was telling her about my dream, I was able to finish it. She was able to finish it, or she was telling me about her dream. I was able to finish it. We found that we had dreamt the same dream. Don't need to analyze this. We also share reoccurring, that's for sure. We share a reoccurring dream, and we're also able to continue it since childhood. And in this scene, I'm drawing how the mood of that dream that we both dream of, and the long corridors. And I'm influenced by the artist De Chirico and the long corridors with the dark shadows that he has. As you can see, I really wanted to explore a different style here and go for something that was much more experimental in terms of colors, but also thinking of metaphors and not trying to depict something the way it is. Even though I did talk about, I did a series on being during COVID on Quarantine. It's called Quarantina Lina, which is Quarantine Lina, it's called. And I spoke about the teaching online and various aspects of COVID, I didn't want to continue in this very realistic manner. This is the last piece that I'm going to share. I went through a period where my son went through very difficult mental health issues and obsessive behaviors that I felt that I wanted to talk about, but I also found that there was very little tolerance for his presence publicly, and I found that even I myself was not as tolerant as I thought I was, and that how people reacted to my son just during this period, thankfully he's much better now, but was strange, and I wanted to show the beauty of his mind and the kindness of his heart and the brilliance of some of the poetry he writes and other things, with a comic that is called My Son Walked Into a Forest. It's published with Kush Comics. I don't know if you know the Balkan comics, which are really I love their comics, international comics book. So first, my son was, since he was 5 years old, he believed he had an African family and African children, and started his obsessions. He was obsessed with African masks, African culture. Then that obsession moved on to wrestlers. He collected them, hundreds and hundreds. He knew their names, their moves, their games. And then came the pharaohs and the Mesopotamian mythologies. He was obsessed with mythology for another few years. And mythology slowly turned spiritual, and my son's obsessions turned inwards. One day it all stopped. He left everything and walked into a forest. And he and his obsessions became one. It's not none. So this was just a comic that was actually about speaking about the obsessive behavior of it, but and for me it was trying to help me understand where it came from and how it led to what the crisis that he went through. The last one is something that's not published yet, and it's called The Labor of Love. But I just wanted to show that I'm working with these strong duotones, flat color, but a bit of texture, and a stylization where I'm going much more metaphoric. I'm reintroducing, of course, the Arabic lettering as part of the graphics, or onomatopoeia, of course. This one is dealing with a loss of a child that I went through, but how my daughter dealt with and it's later on developed anxiety in her dealing with loss and grief, and then slowly in healing. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emma Reynolds. I'm a children's author and illustrator from Manchester, and I make books about nature. My author-illustrator debut, Amar and the Bats, is all about bat conservation and community action. And our upcoming graphic novel, which is out tomorrow in the US and on Thursday in the UK, is called Drawn to Change the World, 16 Youth Climate Activists and 16 Artists. And I'm going to talk to you about how our book began, the kind of beginning of that, and then I'm going to show you some of the process and more about all the artists involved. So taking us back in time to 2019, when the school strikes for climate came over to the UK in a really big way and across the rest of Europe. And at the time, they weren't seen in a positive light. And this really angered me. I distinctly remember this video of this grown man shouting at this young girl to go back to school, and she stood her ground. And it just really made me really angry. And I just thought, what can I do individually in my field to make a difference? And I was like, when am I going to do something? And this was also a heat wave in February. I was in shorts, sweating when it should have been cold. And I just thought, when am I going to do something? So I thought of this idea called Kidlit for Climate, and I was supposed to be on a work deadline, but I went home in a hyper-focus and came up with this logo, came up with this hashtag, and sent a brief out to about 30 friends to say, draw a climate activist and we'll post them in one big image in solidarity with the young people striking, to show that we in solidarity with the young people who we make our books for. And I was expecting maybe 30 images, and I was going to post them in one image for the first global climate strike. But within 2 weeks, I had been sent over 1,000 illustrations, and from all around the world, and it was absolutely incredible. People were like, I finally have a way to kind of express my frustrations with the government not doing anything, and it was just a really wonderful collective effort. And 6 months in, there was over 3,000 from over 50 countries in every continent, even Antarctica. And it just continued from there. So we also took to the streets. We made protest signs around the world. My friends in America, different cities in the UK. And one of them, the one on the right, was the biggest climate strike in history, which saw 7.6 million people from over 185 countries come together. And it just grew and grew, which is really lovely. People made signs, they sent me loads of pictures, the hashtag's taken on a life of its own. And this continued just before the COVID lockdowns in February 2020. And since then, where I'm from in the UK, I know a lot of you are in the UK, but some of you aren't. Just to give you some background, the government here has basically made peaceful protest illegal. And that's changed since I started working on this book. So very different vibes in 2021. Peaceful protest is a human right, because it is. So yeah, I've completely lost count of how many illustrations Kid Lit for Climate has, because like I say, the hashtag's got a life of its own, but I would guess around 10,000, I believe. So these are just some of the ones from India, France, Australia, Spain, South Korea, Indonesia, China, India, Colombia, Canada. And I was asked many times, is this going to be a book? And I decided I did want it to be a book. So some of the artists who ended up working on the graphic novel, I actually met through Kid Lit for Climate. So Margarita Katinga ended up illustrating Arshak Makichan, who's a Russian activist who comes from a place, Russia, where it's very, very hard to be an activist and you get imprisoned. Victoria Moderna ended up illustrating Dora McAnulty, who's an Irish activist and writer. Devon Holsworth, whose work I love and found out about through Kid Lit for Climate, ended up illustrating Daphne Frias's biography. Daphne is an amazing Latina activist who speaks about the intersections of disability justice and climate justice, and how gun violence comes from the same systems that oppress us for the climate crisis. So and Erin Hunting ended up illustrating Jean Hinchlife's comic. So yeah, I originally pitched it as a still image on one side with info on the other side. So that was my original pitch, where I drew Jamie Margolin. But my editor, Megan Olnitsky, said, how about we make the bios into comics? And I thought that's a great idea. So then I made another pitch. And we pitched it as a comic, and we were successful. And we got a book deal in 2020 in lockdown. It wasn't announced till 2022, so I was working away. I shaved my head at the time, the lockdown shave for charity. That's why I have less hair. And then, excuse me, we chose these amazing artists. So I was so honored to work with these incredible people, to bring 16 activist biographies in January 2021 with my hair growing out. Excuse me. I spent a lot of the first few months just doing research. I researched, I read everything I could about every activist. I full grandma mode. I did sketches. I read every single tweet. I watched every video, and I interviewed the activists that I could get in touch with, and paid them with my own money for their time. So it was a lot of research. I think I filled a notebook per activist, and to be quite honest, every single activist has done so much that I could fill a whole graphic novel with everything they've done each. But I only had 4 pages, so 2 double page spreads per activist. So the most challenging thing was fitting all these amazing things they've done into just 4 pages. And without making it too crowded. So it was a balancing act between a whistle-stop tour of what they've done, with still getting some emotional impact there, but not making it too wordy. So I'm very much a visual thinker, so I could not, I don't know how people do it who aren't an illustrator as well, who write a comic script, because I can't think like that. So what I did was I actually thumbnailed the entire thing and then reverse engineered it into a script. But I didn't send this script to the artist because I wanted them to interpret it themselves. But I just kind of kept these to myself, and but I also did these to check it could physically fit, but within 4 pages because it was so tight a space. Yeah, so the artists have never seen these, so if they are seeing these, they can laugh at my blog people and compare it. So I was illustrating Greta Thunberg. I have the most in common with her. I'm also autistic and struggle with OCD. So this is my sketches. These are the color roughs. And this is the final. And that's me putting in that we got a Kirkus star because I'm really proud of us. And Kirkus are really hard to please, so I'm very happy. This is Autumn Peltier's biography, which is illustrated by Natasha Donovan. I think it's absolutely beautiful. It was really, really important to me to not start the graphic novel and center it around Greta Thunberg because she's done amazing stuff. She's done so much, but Indigenous people and people of color and disabled activists have been fighting for this for decades and generations. So I wanted to center the book on the need to center Indigenous solutions. It talks about many different intersections, and it says the stat, the world's biodiversity is protected by Indigenous people who only make up 5% of the population, but they protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. And that's in the book about 5 times, I think, so scattered because it's just so important. This is some beautiful sketches by Devon Holsworth of Daphne, and some lovely sketches of Liam and Namagara by Natasha Nayor. And this is Daphne. She's got cerebral palsy and has just got through cancer treatment, and she's incredible. This is Jamie Margolin, who founded This Is 0 Hour. Leah Namagara, who does birthday trees and was part of the Fridays for Future Amnesty International Award winners, the highest honour. And Malati and Isabel Wyson, who have done so many things, including successfully banning single-use plastics in Bali, and now Malati runs Youthtopia, which is a change makers platform for young people. So yeah, that's me. I just painted a window. That was quicker than I thought, but that's good because we've got time for questions. So yeah, it's out tomorrow in the US and on Thursday, so I'm very excited, and I would love to answer your questions. Thank you.